Hi, and welcome to the Rare Business Podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm a consultant, advisor, researcher, and writer on all things related to customer service and customer experience. Through this podcast, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, and leading thinkers about what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees in this fast-moving modern age that we live in. If this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then welcome, and please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsco.com, as I've now completed over 250 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then thank you for returning, and I'll aim to do a good enough job to keep you coming back week after week. Anyway, that's enough from me right now. Let's get into the interview. So, welcome to the next edition of the Rare Business Podcast. With me today, I have Matt Watkinson, who is a best-selling and award-winning, no less, author and consultant. Hi, Matt. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. How are you, Adrian?
I am very well, sir. So, Matt, for the benefit of our listeners and readers, can you tell us a little bit about you and a little bit about the work that you do?
Yeah, sure. Well, I began my career after university as a web designer, which led me into the world of UX, specifically as a specialism, user experience and interaction design. I kind of followed the contours of the industry, and with the emergence of the iPhone and tablets and that kind of thing, the challenge for my clients that I was working with became not so much having a good website or a good call center or a good kiosk or a good app. It was really joining them all together, which led me from UX into the broader realm of customer experience. Which was the subject that I wrote my first book on, The 10 Principles Behind Great Customer Experiences, which, as you know, won Management Book of the Year when it was released.
Congratulations, by the way, belatedly.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and that book kind of had the effect of promoting me out of harm's way, and that no one would pay me to design anything after that. They just wanted me to talk about it or present on it or talk about strategy and customer experience strategy. And that's what led me to the realization that the way that people make strategic decisions could be markedly improved, and applying the same philosophy of really trying to understand the fundamentals as I had with the first book. I wrote this second book, The Grid, which is a tool for making strategic decisions, regardless of the kind of size or shape of your business. And that came out middle of last year. So that's a kind of, I guess, a 12-year evolution in a minute or two.
Perfect.
So that's how I've ended up here.
So, I mean, just to build on that point, is that, so you wrote the book, The 10 Principles Behind Great Customer Experiences, and that's where some of our listeners and readers may actually be familiar with your name, and that did really, really well and sort of set the benchmark, I guess, in many ways in that sort of space. But then there's this new book that's come out called The Grid, so the decision-making tool for every business, including yours. And so, can you tell us a little bit more about? Well, tell us a bit about the book, and particularly, who's it for? When you say decision-making and decision-making tool, is it like for every level of business and every kind of decision maker, or is it at a particular kind of point, or is it aimed at a particular market size of business, that sort of thing?
The book is for anybody who is involved in making business decisions, whether you're running a village florist or you're the CFO of a global enterprise. The Grid is there to help you make better decisions, because it does something that no other book on this topic does, which is that it allows you to see your business from above, if you like, as an interconnected whole.
Right.
So what the model allows you to do that, to the best of my knowledge, nobody else has cracked, is to consider what you might call the second order effect of a decision.
Right.
So rather than saying, well, let's cut costs, that would be a good thing, you can say, well, hang on, if we cut costs, how might that affect our product quality? How might that affect our customers? How might that affect the ease with which people imitate us? How might it affect our suppliers? And it gives you a very simple and straightforward way to consider your business as an interconnected whole. And the reason why I really wanted to crack that problem is that most of the challenges that businesses have isn't their competencies. It's actually coordination. And the larger an organization becomes, the more specialized people become, the more latent risk there is in people's decisions, because they're not considering the broader consequences of them, or they're not really identifying the root cause of a problem. They're just tackling a symptom. And of course, that doesn't get people anywhere. Whenever you have a dynamic system, whether it's the human body, whether it's the economy, whether it's the environment, or whether it's a business, you can't look at things in isolation and expect to be making good decisions that way. You need to consider things, the kind of broader impact of things, and consider them as interconnected, and that's what the grid allows you to do.
And is that because there's a couple of questions that occur to me when you were kind of talking kind of there, and when I was looking at the book and thinking about it, and actually looking about some of the references, and I guess the two bits that I wanted to ask you about was that was its genesis also driven by your experience, with people that are trying to improve, say, their customer experience, which is the topic of your first book, and that they were doing it in an unconnected way, and therefore generating sort of unintended consequences further down the chain? That's kind of, I guess, the first part. And the second part is that I know that you mentioned the book by Donella Meadows, which is a book that I have and which I really like. This primer on systems thinking. I mean, do you think that there's this kind of lack of a systems thinking approach to business, and because actually the way that we are, I guess, educated and or promoted in our careers is largely due to how much of a specialist we are, in large part, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, so I'll answer them both in the order in which you gave them to me.
Okay.
One of the driving factors behind this book was realizing, as I got promoted out of harm's way, that people would 90% of the time when the phone rang with people wanting to do customer experience projects, the customer experience was not the problem.
Right.
It was that the proposition wasn't competitive. It was that they weren't spending enough on marketing. It was that they just had completely the wrong revenue model for what they were doing. There was some kind of insurmountable adoption barrier for people, or something like that, right?
Okay.
So one of the driving forces behind the grid was getting people to realize what the real problems were in their business, rather than just kind of saying, well, it must be the customer experience in my case. You had calls from some clients where they were confused because satisfaction was going up and sales were going down.
Sure.
And I say, how is it possible that satisfaction is going up and sales are going down? Well, it's quite simple. Maybe a rival has cut their price, or maybe they're outspending you on advertising and people have forgotten that you exist.
Sure.
Maybe they have a better proposition and yours just isn't as compelling as it once was. Right? So this is like the perfect example of what I'm talking about when I say that reductionism is a disaster for business, because unless you have a way of seeing it holistically and considering all of these factors, you can spend a fortune on improving the customer experience and it have zero impact, because it's not the constraint that's limiting the performance of the business.
Sure.
And that's a really a fundamental problem. Nobody has a way, or had a way really until the grid, of looking at the business and going, well, what's the real problem? We had another example with a company phoning up saying, we need to redesign our landing pages because conversion is low. Yeah. And then you take them through the grid and you say, well, how do you know that conversion is low because of the customer experience or the user experience? How do you know that people actually want to do what you're asking them to do? How do you know that this is a competitive and compelling product? How do you know that this is a good fit for your brand? And within 5 minutes, they're going, well, we just never considered that. So it was really driven in many ways by my frustration with the discipline, with the discipline of customer experience, because a lot of the time you'd be trying to solve non-problems. And the other thing that the grid allows you to do from a CX perspective in particular is it allows you to, and this is a major challenge for our discipline, I think you'll agree, it allows you to pin down how your CX program is going to give you commercial returns, and that's something that people will struggle with.
Sure.
So because all of those factors are laid out on the grid, you can say, well, if we improve this part of the customer experience, we anticipate that it will improve customer acquisition. We anticipate that it might improve retention. We anticipate that it might lower our fixed costs because we've got less complaints and queries to handle. We anticipate that we'll sell more. We anticipate, that it will strengthen our brand, whatever. It gives you the rationales, and they're all available on a single page for how you can actually turn a CX program from some kind of vague aspiration to just delight people into something that's going to deliver really tangible, measurable returns. And that was my other frustration, which is that, with customer experience, was that people would dive head first into these programs, often spending millions of pounds or dollars on them, with no idea at all of how they were planning on generating a return from that, which is just, it's not what you should be doing in business. You should be trying to make sure that it's massively wasteful. It's wasteful of people's time. It's wasteful of resources. And ultimately, it doesn't do our discipline any favors. I love customer experience because I believe that if you do it right, it can be a win-win. You can improve your customers' quality of life noticeably, which is fantastic. And you can also generate commercial returns from doing it. But it's also very easy to do neither.
Yeah, frustratingly so.
Very, very clear ways of doing it. So that's my answer, I guess, to the first question. The second question about systems thinking. I mean, I've got a degree from business school, and I also teach on an MBA program as a senior visiting fellow. And I've read, just in research for the grid, 307 or so books on my field, strategy and systems thinking, customer experience. And there is no attention paid whatsoever to systems thinking. It's not taught in business schools. And it doesn't really enter people's consciousness. I mean, it's intuitively obvious to everyone that a business is an interconnected whole and you can't change one part without it affecting others. But that's not how we teach things, is it?
No.
You're taught a discipline. You're taught a specialism. We're becoming more and more and more specialist every year. And we have less and less of an understanding of how the decisions that we make fit into the bigger picture, or even whether we're making good decisions or bad decisions, that they will add up to an unintended, an undesirable consequence. And I had it, it was my first-hand experience of this that really got me thinking that, I had surgery done on both of my knees because I had knee pain.
Yes.
Only to find out 6 months later, when I was still in as much pain as I was before, having gone under the knife, that the problem was muscle imbalances in my hips.
Yes. I mean,
and that just goes to show that it's not just business; it's everything where you have specialists. Unless you're looking at the whole, then it's not if you're going to make a catastrophic decision; it's when. You think about something like Volkswagen.
Yes.
They're like, well, we'll just ignore the regulations. Well, that's now cost them 16.2 billion euro or whatever it is, because they're not considering the broader implications of these decisions. Uber have been banned from London. Wells Fargo's CEO has been sacked. All of these outcomes are the consequences of people looking at parts of their business in isolation and not considering the broader impacts. Like systems thinking is everything. I mean, it really is, especially in business. And if you're looking at the parts in isolation, then it's a disaster waiting to happen, and it's not taught anywhere. And part of that is because academics themselves are specialists.
Yes,
right? Which is part of the problem. You don't specialize in being a general systems thinker. You specialize in marketing or innovation or strategy or whatever. And every organization has a divisional structure pretty much where people are specialists. So the problem is getting worse and worse. Now, I will say that people have tried to bring systems thinking into business, but in my opinion, they made one massive mistake in doing so, which is that they did it from the premise that every business must be a different kind of system. So they would model out flows of information. They would model out variables. They would do these huge completely unusable documents trying to model a business as a
Yes.
system. Whereas I guess my realization was, hang on a second, underneath it all, every business must be fundamentally the same kind of system.
Sure.
So if you get a handle on how business as a system works, like what the inputs and outputs are, what the variables are and how they interconnect, then you can apply that to any company. And that's why it took, 5 years to go from a blank canvas through to the finished model in the book, because trying to get it down to like the real fundamental elements and make it as simple and intuitive and usable as it is really what took the time. But now we're starting to see the results of that, which is fantastic. Like some people are, the impact that it's had on the people who have started using it is tremendous.
Excellent.
And it really does work. I mean, it really, really does help people collaborate more effectively across their different disciplines. It helps people who are launching a new business take a lot of the risk out of their startups. It helps people make much more astute strategic decisions at any level of the company. And it's really starting to get traction now. And it's just amazing to see the difference that it's having for people. It's amazing.
Excellent. I mean, well, it feels like we've talked a lot about it. Well, perhaps it's about time that you gave us a bit of an overview of the grid and its different kind of elements, as it were, just to kind of give people a flavour of what's in this tool, as it were. So, I mean, could you do that? Could you give us a sketch of the different elements and how you sort of compiled those?
Yeah, sure. It's deceptively simple, actually. So the basic starting point was to say, well, what makes for a successful business in the first place? Mm-hmm. And there are really three things. Desirability, because if people don't want what you're selling, you've got a fundamental problem. Mm-hmm. Then profitability, if it costs you more to make than you can sell it for, eventually you're going to run out of cash. Mm-hmm. And then the third is longevity. People don't want to buy from a business that might not be around tomorrow to support the purchase, and they definitely don't want to work for one either. So
yeah, sure.
You've kind of got three goals: desirability, profitability, and longevity. Mm-hmm. Now, you can say a smart decision is one that aims to improve all of those or makes an informed trade-off between them. Something that's a little bit less desirable but a lot more profitable might be great. You can maybe delete some very expensive feature that's only a nice to have and drive your margins up, for example. So sure. Desirability, profitability, and longevity. Now, what it takes to achieve those three things changes all the time because we're in a dynamic environment.
Sure.
Right? And on a fundamental level, on the most basic level, you experience change along three key axes, if you like. You've got the customer, who they are and what they want. If that changes, you've got to consider that in your decision making, of course. Mm-hmm. You've got the market. Maybe a new rival comes along, they change the regulations, or your category saturates or something like that. Either way, if there's a change to your market, you've got to consider that. And then finally, going back to the idea that everything is interconnected, you've got your own organization, which changes too. Maybe you've got a lot more cash than you had when you first started, but you're not as nimble. If you implement one system, Salesforce or something, that then the kind of direction that you go from there. So now we've got three goals: desirability, profitability, and longevity, and three layers of change: the customer, the market, and the organization.
Yeah.
Now, the overriding theme of the book and what we've just been talking about is that everything is interconnected. Right? So any one of those layers of change can affect any one of your goals. Uh-huh. So you can arrange them as a grid with the three goals as columns and the three levels of change as rows. And that gives you 9 factors which together determine the success or failure of every single business.
Sure.
And when you see those 9 factors laid out on the grid, 3 things become immediately clear to people. First is, you can't pick or choose which of these 9 things you want to pay attention to, and yet it's very easy to miss one.
Sure.
Because you've too much to hold in your head. Second, you can't change any one of them without it having a knock-on impact somewhere else.
Yes.
And third, that the major problem in business, especially of scale, it's not competence in these 9 areas, it's coordinating them. Because when you start to see, how changing one is going to impact the others, you start to realize that it's probably more important to consider the impact on the other areas than it is to optimize your one local area.
Yeah.
And it really changes the way that people see their business and the way in which they make decisions. And then within each of these 9 boxes, the thing that really took the time was making it actionable by giving people a sufficient level of detail. So there are 3 further elements within each of these 9 boxes that you can consider. So when we talk about offerings, for example, which would be the intersection of desirability in the organization, the business has to make something, obviously, that's desirable. We have the proposition, we have the strength of the brand, and then we have the customer experience.
Fantastic.
So 3 inseparable elements. When we talk about revenues, which is the intersection of profitability and the customer gives you your revenues, right?
Indeed.
That determines your profitability. You've got the revenue model, price, and volume. I mean, price alone is a fascinating topic because most companies, even huge ones that have billions in revenue, don't have a clear pricing strategy.
Sure.
They don't know whether they're overpricing or underpricing. And they don't really realize the non-linear relationship between a discount and profitability.
Yeah.
You know, because every time you cut $1 off your price, you're cutting a much larger percentage off your margin. And there are some tables in the book that show just how non-linear the impact is on profit. And people think, that can't be right. And then they run the calculations and they realize it's insane. I mean, I think there's some research from McKinsey recently that said that for most of the 1,000 biggest companies in the world, a 1% increase in price would yield an 11% increase in margin,
right?
Assuming volumes kind of stayed the same. So it's huge, the differences that these things make. And I've actually had a guy write to me saying, I read the revenues chapter of the grid. I thought, God, I haven't really thought about my pricing strategy, and now he's implemented a new pricing strategy based on the advice in the grid, and he is far, far, far more profitable.
Fantastic.
I mean, return on investment, if reading that chapter is, for a 20-minute read,
yeah.
I mean, he's going to make probably a few $100,000 more. I mean, it's only a small business.
Maybe you should be asking for a profit share.
Well, maybe I should. So it's been great. I mean, it's been great. I don't know the exact figures of that case study, obviously, but based on what he said, it's having an immediate impact.
So could you actually kind of say? I mean, that's brilliant. I mean, I can see. I've got the grid in front of me, and I look at it and just go, "Yeah, okay, that makes sense." Okay, and it's nice to have it all, like as you say, all on one page and all sort of laid out, so you can try and map your way around it. But can you kind of say? I mean, other than kind of going through and explaining it all now, but sort of give us an example of how somebody might use it, or like an example of that you've used in the book that sort of will illuminate how this applies.
Yeah, sure. So there are three key use cases for the grid that we're pushing and that people have had great results with. The first, the 3 are evaluating a new business idea, so a startup or launching a new product for an existing brand. That's the first. The second is evaluating the performance of your current business, and the third is making significant or strategic decisions. So I'll take them one at a time.
Okay.
When it comes to launching a new business or launching a new product for an existing business, you can use the elements of the grid as a checklist, just as a pilot would before they go down the runway, to make sure that you've thought through all of these individual elements.
Yes.
Because there's one thing that's come across loud and clear from the book and feedback from people and everything. You only need to miss one, and it can be the difference between success and failure.
Right.
You only need to miss one of the elements on the grid, and it can set off a chain of consequences that means that you failed. Like if you don't know what people are willing to pay, for example, is a classic, like people working out the price based on costs rather than the customer's willingness to pay, which is the super highway to failure.
Yes.
Or not. I mean, even basic things like people not doing competitive analysis or not knowing what the cost of acquiring customers is, or any of these things. So use case 1, go through the grid element by element, and for each write down what assumptions you're making, whether they're true or not. It's very, very quick and easy, and it takes a huge amount of risk out of any startup or new product venture. And I had a guy write to me not so long ago saying, I used the grid to structure the business model for my startup. We just got an extra 400 grand in funding. So he's really happy. And I've been in New York helping a company prepare a business plan and growth strategy using the grid as a framework, and it was done in a week, which is great.
Super.
Second use case is evaluating the strengths and weaknesses of a current business. So you can go through each element of the grid and say whether it's a strength, weakness, opportunity, or threat, which gets you down to the real root causes of what's limiting your or constraining your performance overall.
Okay.
So you go, is our brand appeal weak or strong? Is our customer experience weak or strong? Are rivals gaining ground or not? Mm-hmm. Is our territory, do we need to expand our territory to continue to grow, whatever it might be? And that's a very interesting exercise for people, because they typically realize that there are some things that might be strengths or weaknesses that they've never really considered before, because they're just focused on one element. So as you know, in the world of customer experience, there's a lot of emphasis on retention.
Sure.
But it might be that there's a far bigger growth opportunity in actually acquiring new customers. Mm-hmm. And you just haven't thought about it because, you're obsessed with retention for whatever reason. So the second use case is identifying strengths and weaknesses. And then the third one is making strategic decisions, where what you do is you say, we are thinking of doing X, outsourcing our call center, moving all of our data to the cloud, launching in China, whatever it might be.
Sure.
We're thinking of making this decision. And then you go round the elements of the grid, and it doesn't take long to do, and you go, how will that decision impact the business as a whole? So if you're thinking of moving to the cloud, the pros might be, well, it lowers our CapEx, our capital expenditure, because we don't have to invest in equipment. It gives us a more scalable solution. It takes all of the complexity that we have and it makes it someone else's problem, which is great. But then you might come to more of the other elements like bargaining power and say, well, does this give our suppliers so much leverage that they can keep driving the price up because we've got no choice but to stay with them because the switching costs are too high?
Sure.
How might it limit our customer experience? Does this give us any inimitable advantages?
And then, the rules and regulations kind of bet on what is the impact on changing rules and regulations, things like safe harbor, GDPR, all that type of stuff.
Exactly. So what it allows you to do is make a strategic decision where instead of just looking at the things that might be good, like cutting costs or something like that, mm-hmm. You can actually say, well, when we look at the overarching impact of this decision, it might actually not be as smart as we first thought. And it's incredible. We've been running these grid workshops for people where, they get to experiment with these use cases. So we show them how to use it, and then they're given decisions to work through by the management.
Sure.
Which we work out with them. And they're given half an hour, and they sit in a group of 5 or 10, and they go around the grid on a flip chart. And they're all from a different discipline in that team. So you might have someone from sales, someone from marketing, someone from finance, someone from brand, mm-hmm. and they're given this one decision to work on. And it's amazing because they immediately realize, well, hang on, this guy's view of the world is totally different to mine. And I've never considered his, and he's never considered mine.
Yeah.
And we are, as a team, even in a group of 6 people, making a ton of assumptions about things that might not be true, that mm-hmm. we haven't really researched. And it's like such an eye-opening experience for them, and it's so gratifying for us providing this, because you can it really starts to move people away from just group work and into real teamwork.
Yeah.
Because they start to really understand what the different people in their business actually do and how they think. And it's just incredible to see how they start to work together, and they start to go, oh, I'd never really considered working capital because I'm a brand guy,
Yeah.
Or I really considered how that might impact our customers because I look at a spreadsheet all day, and it's, if I'm gushing about it, it's because it's so exciting and it's really it's really transformative when you see it working right in front of your eyes. It's incredible. I mean,
Excellent.
it really.
It reminds me of that. Who's the company that had the advertising slogan? It's good to talk.
Mhm.
I think that was BT, perhaps.
BT. Yeah, good old BT.
No, exactly. So, but it just shows that when you give people the opportunity to explore things and look at things from a different angles, how all these problems like you talked about, the problems of coordination, and people talk about siloed thinking and all that stuff. All that stuff starts to fall away because you're just giving people a context and a way of talking to each other that helps build that sort of empathy musculature in themselves within an organization.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And there are a couple of points on that. I mean, the first is that a silos aren't on the org chart, they're in your mind. Silos exist in your mind.
Totally.
They come down to what you know or what you don't know. So you can have the most beautiful matrix structure, very clever organizational structure and engineering. If people aren't thinking, it doesn't really matter, does it? If you don't know what these factors are that matter, no amount of reorganizing the company is going to help you collaborate or coordinate more effectively. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that one of the things that people have often said, even now, and it's quite early days, I guess, for the grid, is that it gives us a common language.
Yes.
It gives us a set of terms. And it's quite funny to see people going from, I think this, I think that, to, well, hang on, let's think about that top left box or that bottom right box. And it gives people this lingua franca or way of talking about things that that just makes the debate that people have much more engaging and efficient and effective, but at the same time much less stressful, because you're not getting heated about your opinion. You've actually got this map that you can all agree on, that everybody in the company can agree on, to help them make more structured decisions. And it's much quicker and it's much more effective as well. So it's great.
Fantastic. So, but I was looking at the grid and things, and recently I've been having lots of different discussions about lots of different folks about stuff that are starting to show up in terms of having an impact on experience, whether it's an employee's experience or a customer's experience, and things like a purpose and organizational form and agility and employee experience and all these different things as being key elements in that whole customer experience mix. I mean, how would those things fit into the grid? Are they like sub-elements of kind of some of the elements you've got identified, do you think? Or I guess my point is the list right now that you've got, which is the 27 different, the 9 different boxes and the 27 different elements. I mean, are they exhaustive so far in your thinking, or where is this an emergent thing? There could be other things that sort of emerge over time.
Yeah, so this is a very good question, and it's one that's come up a few times. People look at the grid and they say, well, where's leadership on the grid? Or they say, where's culture on the grid? Or things like that, or some of these other factors that you've mentioned. And there are a few reasons why these things, or they say, where's technology on the grid?
Yeah.
And there's a very simple reason why these things are missing, which is that the grid does not purport to tell you everything that you need to run a successful business or operationalize things. It gives you the fundamental elements that determine whether a commercial venture is going to succeed or fail.
Right.
And most of those other things are means towards those ends.
Right.
If you see what I mean.
Yes.
So there's like an operational layer below the grid, which is really, really very, very, very important, but it's not what the grid is there to do. So let me give you a couple of examples that put a bit more flesh on the bone around what I'm saying there.
Okay.
If you think something like, just because it's top of mind at the moment, the culture problems at Uber around those cultural problems on one level you can say, yes, this is a problem with the culture, but how does that cultural problem affect the business?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it affects the business because it clashes with the customer's beliefs and values, which is on the grid.
Yes.
It affects the business because it diminishes the appeal of the brand, which is on the grid. It affects the business because they have a cavalier attitude to regulations, and regulations is something that's on the grid, right? And so when you look at these cultural phenomenons or these other problems, what you will find is that they always connect back to elements that are on the grid that are the real drivers of whether a business succeeds or fails.
Sure.
It's almost like you've got the ends, which are on the grid, and you've got the means, which are things like culture, technology, leadership, people. Like, people are hugely, hugely important, and we've made this tool for people to help them enjoy their work life more and find more fulfillment in their work by having a better chance of succeeding and by making collaboration with other people more enjoyable and productive and rewarding. But people don't have a box on the grid because people permeate the whole grid. So your people cost money, your people generate revenue, your people create your customer experience, your people may give you an inimitable advantage, whatever. But all of your decisions about people can be made through the different lenses of the grid.
Okay.
No, for example, like if you have terrible employee experience, well, why is that bad for business? It's bad for business because you have high turnover of staff, which costs you money, which is on the grid. They provide a bad experience for your customers because they're unhappy, which is on the grid.
Yeah.
They start saying bad things about your brand to their friends and family. And awareness and brand appeal are both on the grid, right? So there's like another operational layer beneath it. We're really just talking about the fundamentals in the context of decision making.
Right. Okay.
So I hope that kind of clears that up a little.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because it struck me. I just thought there has to be a connection somehow. But I wanted to ask explicitly. I was thinking, yes, these are vehicles that enable. So it's a bit like you talk about a map. Well, it's like if I talk about going from London to Birmingham, there's a number of different ways that we can do that. Whether you set off walking, or you take a bike, or you take a train, or whatever it might be. There's a number of ways of getting from A to B, and there's a means. I like people, culture, leadership, technology, etc., but which are separate from the decisions and possibly the opportunity.
Yeah, and one of the great things about the grid, I think, in that light, is that it actually provides you with ways to strengthen the business case for these other kinds of investments in employee experience, investments in customer experience, investments in facilities or technology, because you can tie them back to what are the fundamental commercial drivers of the business. Like you can say, well, we should invest in employee experience because happy workers are more productive.
Sure.
And they have lower staff turnover, and they do a better job of promoting your brand. Now, if we wrap some metrics around that, we can see that this investment here in whatever it might be, better maternity leave conditions or paternity leave conditions, or a nicer office environment for people to work in, or flexi time or work from home, whatever, it's likely to make the experience of working for us more enjoyable, and that's likely to save us money with a payback period of, whatever, 2-3 years.
Sure.
With improvement in the brand. So it gives you a way to structure all of these conversations that make things, seem much more tangible and commercially minded, which is something that we're all trying to do.
Absolutely. So, I mean, that's really helpful, Matt. So thank you for that. And I can look at this grid and knowing as a fellow author, I can look at this and just kind of understand how this took 5 years. So I'm tipping my hat to you now, because there feels like there's probably been a lot of sweat and headaches and things gone into this as you kind of like boil it down.
Oh man, I can give you some context to that will make you cringe as a writer yourself. I got 50. Hang on. I got a third of the way through and then realised that the structure of the book wasn't quite right. Like there was a more intuitive way of doing it, which is obviously what we have now. And I started again.
Right.
So I started again about 30,000 words in. And then I got another third of the way through, and I realized that there was an opportunity to make the model one notch simpler.
Right.
Because we were testing this thing over and over and over again with people. I mean, it's been through over 150 iterations, the model. And I had this brain trust of people from venture capital, from the C-suite of big companies, startups, everything, like people crawling all over every single word and the model and everything. And I realized that it can make it simpler. So then I got to having written 56,000 words and started again. So there was a day where I was well on my way towards the publishing deadline. And I was staring at a blank page of my notebook and a blank Word document with a flashing cursor, having just binned the best part of 55,000 words and started again. So I really suffered to make this book the best it can be. And you'll notice that there are all these little touches in there, like rather than just saying, here's some further reading, it gives you a little review of all of those further readings so that you can find the book that you're most likely to enjoy. There's this executive summary at the end, which gives you everything that you need to get up and running. In just 20 minutes. It's structured in a very straightforward kind of way with this fast track at the beginning
Yeah.
to get up and running, and then the deep dive so you can just follow your nose. Oh, I'm interested in pricing, so I'm just going to read about pricing. I'm interested in understanding more about adoption barriers. I'm just going to read about those, whatever it might be. So, yeah, a tremendous amount of love has gone into making this thing great, and I've got to say, like, Random House were just amazing. My editor Nigel was amazing. The whole team, my business partner and best mate Ben was amazing. Like, it was really a Herculean team effort. And some of those chapters have been rewritten 8 or even 9 times from scratch to make them as clear and concise as they are now. We do it because we want to create the best reading experience possible, but it's almost a sign that you've got it right when no one notices how much you suffered.
You just have to wear high neck shirts and kind of long sleeves to hide all the bruises. That's all, and sunglasses and things. But I recognise that and just congratulate you on it. But I guess thinking about there's a lot in it. And if I was to say to you, if you've got an executive or a leader, an entrepreneur that's listening to this interview, reading the highlights and things, and they're thinking about some of the issues that we've talked about, I mean, what advice would you? I guess apart from actually buying the book itself, what advice would you give to them in terms of starting on this type of approach or exploring this? Because I like you and I know, sometimes the first step is always the most important one because it gets people going.
Yeah, so there are a few things on that we've learned from running these workshops and sitting down with people, and when the book came out and the tools became public, because you can download the grid and the worksheets and PowerPoint templates and everything for free from the website. That's Matt-Watkinson.com. You can download all of this stuff and play around with it. So that's the first thing.
Fantastic.
And when the book came out, I was trying to spend an hour every single day talking to people who were using the model or trying it out,
right.
to learn from it. And there are a few things that have come up. The first thing is just to try it, right?
Right.
Because as soon as you start playing around with it, it starts to make intuitive sense. Most of the barriers to people getting up and running with it are that they just haven't sat down to try it. Like, if you just print off the worksheet and actually have something in mind, it all starts to make sense very, very quickly. So the first thing I'd say is just give it a go.
Right.
The second thing I would say is that when you do give it a go, have something very, very specific in mind that you want to work on. So if it's a new venture, it's quite easy because you typically have one product. Mm-hmm. If you're evaluating a business, restrict it to one product or service and just do that. Don't try and do your whole business on one grid because it doesn't work.
Yeah.
If you're making a strategic decision, the one thing that we've noticed that determines people's success with using the grid is how clear that question is. So when it's all Ben, my business partner, has said, like, after this workshop that we've just done, it's almost, you got to think of it as like mirror, mirror on the wall kind of thing.
Right.
The way to do it is to have a very, very specific question. So something like, should we choose Microsoft as a cloud provider, is a clear question that the grid can answer, because you can work out strengths and weaknesses. Should we choose Microsoft or Google as a cloud provider? Isn't, because you need to model out those two scenarios separately on individual grids,
right,
and then compare them. See what I mean?
Yes.
And if it's a vague question like, if it's a vague thing like changing the culture, well, that's not something the grid can help you with. Like, you need to have a clear question that you're looking for an answer to. So should we enter the Chinese market is a very clear question. Should we improve our returns policy is a very clear question. Should we, whatever it might be, you need very, very clear and specific questions. What are the strengths and weaknesses of of X specific product line?
Yes.
You've got to be very specific and very clear, because if you're vague, and that's one of the big learnings from the grid, is that a lot of the time people don't really know what the challenge that they're trying to work on is. So,
or actually
so
maybe they actually haven't actually spent the time, or have had the courage to actually whittle it down, because when they whittle it down, you actually get closer to the real problem. And that sometimes is what a lot of people are starting to avoid in many cases.
Yeah, sure. So there's two pieces of advice. One, just give it a go.
Yeah.
Two, have something very clear in mind that you're working through. So we use a grid obviously ourselves internally, and we've just gone through a decision about whether to hire someone into a particular full-time role.
Yeah.
And we went through the grid. Well, fixed costs go up. That's great, but capacity goes up, which is also great. So we work around the model and go, oh well, we hadn't really thought of that. Okay. And then out of the grid comes these next steps that we've got to follow up.
Yeah.
So it makes sense when people use it. And the third thing, just the last thing, is I'd say don't overthink it. Like, people have a tendency to start thinking, well, it's like I've got to complete every box, and I've got to go through this in a hyper rigorous way. It's not true. You just need to follow your nose. As long as you're having new ideas, as long as you're thinking, as long as you're noticing risks or things that maybe you hadn't thought of before, it's working. You don't need to overthink it. It's just there. The way that we describe the grid is as mental scaffolding to help you make a better decision. It's just there to structure your thinking and help make better decisions that way. It's not a rule book. It's not a magic formula. It's not a template. It's certainly not a silver bullet that's going to solve your problems. It's just a way to help you structure your thinking that brings much greater clarity and confidence to the decisions that you're making, and minimizes the risk of any kind of significant error or misjudgment in your decision making. And you see, like, even with, I don't know if you've read something like the Checklist Manifesto, but
yes,
the impact of putting in very simple checklists in hospitals on death rates has been tremendous.
Phenomenal.
And it's not because people are stupid. They're surgeons, right? They're extremely smart. It's not because they're not experienced either, because you have to be very experienced to qualify to perform surgery on somebody or to fly an airplane. It's just that we've got a lot to think about.
Sure.
And we're human, and we're fallible, and we make mistakes, and shit happens. So, in the context of business decision making, the grid is really there just to almost, in a way, remind you of the basics and give you a very, very structured way to make these decisions, where you say, yep, I've thought about that. Oh, actually, hang on, I hadn't thought about that. And one of the things that's been interesting when we've done keynotes or that kind of thing on this is that you'll be going through the individual elements of the model, and people will go, yep, this is obvious, yep, oh, oh, hang on a second, yep, oh my God, I haven't thought of that. And then they suddenly realize that there's some gaping hole in their business plan or their decision-making process, where one thing that is fundamental to the success of their business just isn't being considered.
Sure.
It's amazing watching from the podium. I've got to say, it's quite funny. But there we are. It's great. It's early days, but the initial feedback is amazing. And if I had to go through it all again, I would, because I really think, and maybe it's grandiose, but I really think that we're in with a shot of fundamentally changing how people make business decisions away from this kind of lethal reductionist approach, which is getting us nowhere, towards systems-based view, which is the future of business. Every discipline is moving in that direction. Maths, physics, even economics is talking about complexity and systems thinking, and business isn't. So there's no doubt that we're going to move in this direction, and it just feels great to be making what I think is a really positive contribution to the field.
Perfect. I mean, Matt, because I've been along, or going down a sort of similar track to you and looking at things from a bit of a systems approach, and so I am both envious that you've got this out, because I'm thinking about it and going, what is the impact on my sort of current next book ideas, and I'm just looking at it and feeling slightly deflated. Which no, don't worry about that. That's just kind of it. I'm going through the kind of the mental kind of rumination, boiling down process right now. But I'm really enthused by the fact that you've got there's a systems approach is embroidered into the very heart of this, which I think is great. I think congratulations on taking it on. It feels, I mean, it's a piece of work. So well done for that, and yeah, congratulations on the 5-year marathon. I mean, it's I think it's great. But I just wanted to say, I mean, thinking about time and things, I always ask these kind of, well, there's one question at the end of these interviews, and the question is this: Matt, is there anything that you would like to shamelessly plug? As if I can't actually guess what it might be. But you have the floor is yours, sir.
Well, I mean, I obviously I would like people to read this book and to play around with the model and download the stuff that we've got on the website. It's matt-watkinson.com. We're actually rebranding all of that stuff in the not too distant future, because we've actually grown a lot more quickly than we anticipate with this. So we're building out a much larger, more scalable organization to support the grid because of that interest. But yeah, I mean, it is a shameless plug, but it's a shameless plug with good intentions, because it's going to help you make better decisions.
Sure.
If you're starting a business, it's going to help you. If you're trying to make challenging, complex trade-offs and decisions, it's going to help you. If you're a CX or customer experience professional and you're looking to get better returns out of your programs or really communicate the value of your discipline, it's going to help you.
Sure.
So, yeah, it's a shameless plug, but it's really more about trying to help people and make a real contribution. Like, that's what it's all about. At the end of the day, I wrote this book because I believe that our work life has a tremendous impact on our well-being.
Yes.
It really does. We spend so much time at work. When things go bad at work, we tend to bring it home with us. Mm-hmm. When things go great at work, we also tend to bring it home with us. Like, when work is boring or when it's extremely stressful or when it's uncertain, it can have a tremendous impact on your well-being, but it's also a vehicle for tremendous sense of achievement and accomplishment and pleasure and joy and friendship and all of that stuff. And what I've tried to do with this book is to say, look, you can have a more fulfilling work life in part by making sure that you make better decisions that move you towards your particular ambition, whether it's to climb the ladder in your corporation, whether it's to, some people dream of starting their own business. Mm-hmm. Other people love their current business as it is. They just want to do a little bit better or learn a little bit more. Like, whatever your goal is in business, in your professional life, what separates you from where you are now and achieving that goal, there is a continuum of decisions that you have to make.
Mm-hmm.
And every decision is moving you towards your goal or away from it, potentially. So my real hope with this book is that by giving people a way just to make better decisions, then it will help them to achieve their goals and their ambitions. That's what it's all about. And so I really hope it does that for people.
Matt, thank you for that. Also, thank you for your time and sharing your kind of thoughts with us today. And also, congratulations on the book. I'll make sure I get all that linked up and sort of written up when it goes live. But yeah, thank you once again for your time today. That's been great.
It's really my pleasure. Thank you so much, Adrian.
Well, that's it for another interview. I really hope you enjoyed it. Now, every time I complete one of these interviews, I learn something new. And I try and incorporate that new learning into my writing, my speaking, my workshops, and the consulting that I do for my clients. If you're interested, you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswimsko.com. But one final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do listen in again. All the very best.